As we introduce others here, I just want to say a few words about Chi Chu, who's quite new to our community. I mean, you know his title, but that's about it. So let me explain that he's responsible for the Amazon services that attract customers to Amazon early in their shopping journey. So he's a very clever guy, number one. This includes Amazon reviews, wish lists, performance marketing, personalization, and mobile shopping. He's responsible for the Amazon's global IT team, so this checks him around. Prior to Amazon, Chi was Vice President of Engineering at Google, responsible for Google's real-time communications efforts like Hangouts and Google's Chrome efforts in the Kirkland, Seattle region. His 20% project, you know, Google has this plan where you can spend 20% of your time on problems that you choose. His 20% project was being the site lead for the Google Seattle and Kirkland offices overseeing logistical operations of the site. Chi started his professional career with a love of writing code. This is not a surprise, I guess, for a company that he works for. He was the development lead responsible for the Windows 95 start menu and taskbar, among other user interface elements. He led the engineering teams of the Internet Explorer, Windows Mobile, and Xbox Live, obviously at Microsoft, not at Google. Chi was born in Malaysia. He grew up in South Carolina and Kentucky before going to college at MIT, where he interned at Hewlett-Packard Labs to earn his bachelor's and his master's degrees in computer science. Chi and his wife, Christine, live in Seattle. Their parents have Arden, a biomedical engineering student at Johns Hopkins, and Mira. Chi holds a 5th degree black belt in karate, so be nice to him. Greg, on the other hand, is well known in our community, probably not as well known to our board. Greg graduated from Olin in 2010 with a degree in electrical and computer engineering. At Olin, he worked on self-driving vehicles with the Olin Intelligent Vehicles Lab. Since Olin, Greg has lived in San Francisco, where he's part of the team that launched Google's Google Plus social network before joining Facebook to work on the newsfeed team. Greg's work applies machine learning to find the most relevant things to show people in their feeds. Lately, Greg has been focused on reducing the amount of false news and other low-quality content on Facebook. That's not a big problem, is it? I mean, in addition, Greg leads Facebook's Rotational Product Managers program, which seeks to find people from a wide variety of backgrounds and prepare them as to be leaders in Facebook's product team. So here's a guy who's, I learned from our recent visit, who's cultivating and mentoring the young leadership group within Facebook. So it's a fascinating study of how Facebook thinks of mentoring. Now, you can't major in product management, so people don't have this on their transcript as their PhD in product management. So the ideas behind a growth mindset are a central part of what the program tries to instill. So that's our panel. We've just met from Woody, and I'm just going to be a moderator here and ask you, first off, I'm going to go down and ask Chi for a few minutes, and then Greg for a few minutes to respond to Woody's talk in a couple of ways. Number one, if you can think of a couple of things that you really resonate with that Woody brought out, and anything, on the other hand, that you might have a different view on. I think this would be a good time to bring it up.
Having a different view from a 5th degree black belt's a little scary.
We separated you a ways.
I really appreciate what Woody said. What you said really resonates with me. Overall, the growth mindset, the always thinking about possibilities, I think is incredibly important. One of the things that I've enjoyed at Amazon, we have these core principles, these 14 principles, leadership principles that we hire on, we promote on, is involved in we review people on, and one of them is learn and be curious. There's a notion of always learning, always being curious, and if you don't have that mindset of always learning, which I think is really the same essence of growth, you won't succeed. One of the quotes that that Jeff Bezos has that I love is he keeps saying, I want to make new mistakes, like, which implicitly says, don't stay within the realm of what you're comfortable with. Don't repeat old mistakes, learn from them. Always be learning from your past mistakes, but seek out new mistakes. So I think that hunger for new mistakes is incredibly important. I love the way you're thinking about really the empathy that people have to have with your customer as well as other members in your team. In many ways, there's an engineer leader that I have huge respect for, Bill Corin. You know, Bill, he was one of the engineering leaders at Google. He had this saying that says, engineering is easy, people are hard. And I think that's really, really true. The actual technical part is not nearly as difficult as the understanding, the collaboration with other people around, as well as finding the products that really resonate with your customer base. So the philosophies that I have for leadership, I think what you say really speaks to me on that.
I understand in the latest letter to the stockholders,
Yes.
Jeff Bezos said, we must never be in year 2. He always wanted to be
Day
in
two.
Day 2. Sorry, I
Day two.
apologize. Yeah.
It's always day one.
Day 1. Yeah.
In fact, the building that he works in is called Day One. Mm-hmm. And recently he moved buildings and he took the name with him. So the new building is called Day One. Yes, and at any point where you make one of these mistakes, we do a post-mortem. We call it a COE, a correction of errors. We analyze what went wrong, and at the end of it, we say, well, we made some mistakes, but now it's day one again, and we start over. So that's a very strong philosophy. Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, so at Facebook, I'll very briefly describe the role of a product manager in a tech company because I don't think it's something everyone knows. We use the metaphor where a product manager is like the conductor of an orchestra. So in an orchestra, there's many people who are very skilled at something like playing the flute or playing the trumpet. And the conductor is the person who has no instrument whatsoever and is waving their arms like crazy. And so you're like, what's this person doing? And it's really knowing the traits of each person on the team, helping the team figure out what are we all doing together, and then go and do that thing. And the skills there require understanding the technical aspects of music and understand all of those things, but also really a lot of soft skills of how do you organize the group, how do you figure out what we should be doing. And so we don't have the expectation that people who arrive necessarily have those skills in the first place. And so in the program that I lead, the first value, we have 3 values in the program, is growth, which is during your time in the 18-month program, how do you as a person make sure that you're being introspective and reflective and intentional so that you're building the skills that you need to develop here. But the second value that we have is community, which is that this isn't a single player game and that you're part of a team of other people at the company and in this program who are doing the same things. And so it's not only about what you're able to contribute to yourself through that growth, but what you're able to contribute to the other people who are in that program. And by pulling other people up with you and being pulled up by the others, we're all going to accomplish a lot more together than we would have individually. And so I think the thing that I really liked in your presentation was juxtaposing those final 2 videos, where on one hand, FIRST Robotics is an engineering competition, and you showed a video of unbelievably high quality engineering. But the highest award in FIRST isn't the you were really good at engineering award, it's the you were really good at helping other people become passionate and motivated and exposed to the space award. And I think that idea of not only is it important for you to develop those skills in yourself and grow yourself, it's important to pull other people along with you is a really, really important one. So I really liked that. I think one of the things I'd be interested to dive a little bit more into is you talked a lot about the idea of using computers to train people. And so I can ask Alexa questions about why is the sky blue, and I'm going to find out. And I think that's great for training skills. Mm-hmm. But what do we do to train people in these soft skills? Where is Alexa going to teach me how to pull other people up with me? Or is that one of the uniquely human attributes?
If that's a question, I think right now that's still a uniquely human thing. And as is clear from what I was saying, my model is you behave as a mentor or a coach rather than a delivery mechanism for codified information. I think Alexa can do the codified information thing. Advanced versions of Alexa will probably do really delightful versions of that. But the stuff that is going to differentiate people is the stuff that you learn from mentorship, I think.
And can Alexa teach mentorship?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it works out. You know, Eric Schmidt's presentation at MIT recently painted a pretty amazing picture about how much is already happening. And but you know, one of the things that I have mixed feelings about, because I just don't know how to interpret it. But right now we're in a position where billionaires are doing things that government used to do, and I hope the billionaires do well. You know, I hope both of you have said things about workplace being humanized and caring, and I hope that prevails. But I think there's some other workplaces that are not that way. So I hope the power struggle ends up being one in which good wins.
Any questions from the audience?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What do each of you think is about to happen that's going to be delightful in the digital world?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think your use of the Echo as an illustration is really interesting. I think one of the interesting transformations in terms of the skill transfer, knowledge transfer, is that you can now have kids who are pre-literate but like post-language skills that can now, instead of asking their parents why this, why that, what's this, what's that, will have this weird world where they've grown up where anytime they have a question, a factual answer is available to them. And I think the idea of starting from like, well, I know everything because I just ask the computer and it tells me the answer to everything, for someone who's pre-literate is going to totally transform their relationship with knowledge and their relationship with what they're able to know and what they're able to do.
So if you were a philosopher king and could give away 1 million of those, to whom would you give them?
I think I would give it to the people who don't have the like strong, stable parent figure already in their life. Because I think those are the places where there's a lot of research on early childhood education and how people who are in families where maybe there's only one parent and that parent has to work 2 jobs have much worse outcomes, sort of as your illustration showed.
Score 1 for the billionaires and not 1 for government. So.
I think I'd answer your question or take liberty to answer it a little bit differently than maybe you were intending. The thing I'm most excited about is I think we're on this crux of inflection point around technology becoming really accepted, natural, integral into everyone's life for a forward acceptance point of view. And you might say, hey, technology is everywhere and that's fully accepted, but I don't really think we're quite there yet. When I was at MIT, not all that long ago, we had Project Athena, which is the computer system, and there were some folks who went through college and did not use Athena. They were kind of like, that's for the computer guys. That's not so true anymore. But technology and programming or algorithms are not yet on the same level as reading and writing and arithmetic that you do from grade 1. My mom finally got a smartphone about a year ago, but that's not as integral. I think that at the point where technology becomes really at the same level as reading and writing and arithmetic, I think that's a revolution for us. That's an inflection point. And we're getting there, but we're not quite there. I think that's the part of computing that I think is just the most exciting thing.
Your comment about Athena is nostalgic for me because I once sat down at an Athena terminal and I couldn't remember my password, and in frustration I typed in God, and the computer came back and said, Athena does not know God.
Any other questions? Hey, there were some hands up.
Yeah, let's say we had the completely hypothetical exercise that we got to start a new university. There's at least 3 of these in the room today that I know of. Who knows what other entrepreneurs are out there. So how would you operationalize all of your input and advice to how you would actually create the curriculum and the pedagogy of a new university?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, I think one idea that I've thought a lot about, and I went to Olin, so I have sort of that as my background, is to President Miller's point around students understanding how the work that they're doing applies in the real world. And I think one of the things that is surprising to me going out into the real world is realizing how many big problems there are in the world that are, everything from climate change to social justice issues that I never ended up exposed to until like much later in life. And looking at something like the Engineering Grand Challenges program is a very fascinating set of like really big problems in the world that we have to go and figure out. Water access, how do we help elderly people cope with issues they have, how do we address climate change? And I think an interesting idea for education is how do we make it much more explicit what people's connection with what they're learning is to some big problem that they're passionate about solving in the world. And I think Olin does a good job with some of its courses to help connect the real world impact, like Katrin talked about last night, actually going out into the community and doing service that way. But I think there's something really interesting about having people explicitly say, this is the problem that I want my body of knowledge to accumulate towards solving. And you're probably going to change what that is over the course of your career. But being much more explicit and then saying, oh, my final project in this class is going to be about water access, even though this class is linear algebra, right? I'm going to find a way to tailor the project to something in that space, I think is a really interesting way of rooting the things that you're learning in the applicability and getting you to think about what's the impact of my work going to be in the world.
I don't know if I can, I'm just learning right now. So I don't know if I'm a great one to answer that question. I'm just really being introduced to what it's like. But I'll tell you that sitting through the sessions that we had past a couple days, the thing that I keep coming back to are understanding what are the barriers for folks thinking in a new way. What are the things that cause us as humans, as natural humans, to hold on to old ways that have been successful to some extent? And how do you change the motivations? How do you align people to be willing to let go of the past, to willing to take a risk, and align the motivations to hit a new goal together? That's the thing I see over and over at a lot of places where we start new, whether it's a brand new project at work or anything like that. As humans, we tend to hold on to the past more, which is one of the advantages that computers have, because you can ask a computer to let go of the past more readily because they don't have that sort of emotional ties.
Ed can tell us how he answered that question in Russia. Christine might be able to tell us what she's going to do. Where is she? Oh, didn't see. We know what Rick and his colleagues have done. I think, I'm intimidated by the question for good reason, I think. It's scary. But having to make the decision right now would really intimidate me, because operationalizing my dream is really hard. But I think, starting to relieve some of the constraints at first, the chapter I wrote 19 years ago said, produce high quality training materials so you make space. And I've done the economics of that, and I'll repeat them just very quickly. In 1994, this is an example, it's not doing the economics, but 1994, 600,000 college freshmen took calculus. 250,000 failed, 42% failure rate. If you say that 250,000 failures at $2,000 a piece, that's $500 million for one course at one level. The opportunity, and that means that the cost of that is $500 million a year amortized over forever, and at today's interest rates, that's your basic really large number. That's what it took to produce the movie Avatar. And the movie Avatar has roughly 1,000 companies and people at the end in the credits that are the best in the world at what they do. So part of my argument is that we've never done one damn thing in education that was the best you could ever do. We've not collected the best in the world and made something like high quality materials that could be used to help touchscreen AI-backed equation solvers, so you could actually assign, go derive an equation and actually see what happened and have an AI system learn what was hard about it and not. I think we need to up our ambition to really do it right, because the cost of not doing it is essentially infinite. So some collective courage would be needed to do that. So I can dream about, operationalizing on that scale, but I think we need to be as close to that as possible. I've talked to Christine about what she's going to do, but I don't know. But somehow trying to marshal big forces to do the right codified material delivery system that's as good as Watson's going to be at cancer therapy, et cetera. And look at examples like Olin for learning more about how to do the coaching interactive stuff is where I would go. And I realize that's not a complete answer.
Sally.
Woody, I, as always, very much enjoyed your talk. I especially appreciated the combination of technology and concepts like gracious professionalism, which is a drum I'm always beating with our students here and with any young people that I work with. And I'm curious from Chi and from Greg at companies like Facebook and Amazon that are so large, so cutting edge, such really important employers of these very bright young people, how you feel like your organizations are doing on the scale of empathy and mentoring and kindness, and what you feel like they could do to make them even better.
I think that for Amazon, my personal opinion is that we're lopsided on that right now. I think that we work really hard to have great customer empathy. When you look at our leadership principle, it is the first one. And our mission or vision is to be the most customer-oriented company in the world. So I think we work with great empathy on our customers. I think that sometimes we do that at other expenses, where we think of it with a either-or mindset, where it is the customer or the seller, the customer or our own employees. And I think that the challenge for us is to more think about how we really have that sort of gracious professionalism for the entire ecosystem, including our employees. So I think that we have a ways to go, but so far we've started primarily on the customer side.
I think inside of Facebook, the biggest group we have that sort of is able to push this kind of mentorship is the community of managers, because those are the people whose job is actually to help people grow and develop in these ways. And so we try to figure out how do we help these people learn these ideas of coaching and of mentoring, and viewing themselves not as the knowledge holder who the people who report to, you're just telling them what to do, but actually to think about each person's journey, where in the very beginning of someone doing a new job, you do actually want to say, like, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and that's how you'll make progress, because otherwise you'll get stuck. But then get people to a place where they're able to learn and solve problems on their own and come to you more for advice. So the challenge becomes, how do you sort of scale that knowledge across lots of people? And then how do you make that something where it's a cultural value of the institution, that's what you go and assess managers on? And in addition to, did your group hit its quantitative business outcomes for whatever you were trying to accomplish, did you actually grow the capacity inside of your team so that you're going to have an easier time with that in the future, and that you've helped these people grow and develop and learn? And I think that's one of the challenges that we're always trying to balance, because on one hand, the business outcomes are what enable those teams to exist in the first place, but it's very important that we're growing that capacity among our managers to help everyone else inside of the organization grow.
I do think that one of the things that I'm excited about overall is I see more and more companies realizing the importance of this. That if you watch the trends, the sustainable companies that look for the long term, look at the long-term health of the whole ecosystem. And you can't just drive for the short-term bottom line. And when you really embrace what that means, that drives us much more towards really have this, hadn't heard the phrase gracious professionalism, but that really is taking care of all the constituents, thinking about your customer base, your own business, your employees, all cycles as one healthy ecosystem that you've got to make healthy. And I think that's more companies are realizing that, and as they do, they're succeeding more. I think that's a great thing that will help move us forward.
Before moving on, I have one small distinction I'd like for you to just comment on. Who are the customers of Amazon, and who are the customers of Facebook? And are they the same, or are they different?
Well, so when we think about customer at Amazon, really, we think about customer as who's trying to benefit from whatever action you're taking at that time. Of course, the shopper is the obvious customer, and probably the one we hold most dear. We look at a seller who's trying to make money on Amazon also as a customer. And then, since I run global IT, my IT team looks at an employee as a customer. So we try to take a mindset of whomever you're serving at that moment is the customer, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sort of thinking of it as a business school thing, trying to follow the money. So where does the money come into Amazon, and is that the customer, or I'm getting a more complex answer from you than that.
We try to avoid being focused of the customer as simply where the money is, because I think that then creates a little bit of a lopsided view of it, and you want to look at the whole ecosystem. But there certainly is a lot of influence on money. I think that's why people come and sell and buy from Amazon, right?
I think it's interesting. Amazon and Facebook are both very heavily network products, right? So Amazon explicitly is a marketplace, and increasingly Amazon is not the only vendor on Amazon. You're buying things from the affiliate sellers.
Yeah.
On Facebook, depending on which product you're talking about, there's a very multifaceted set of stakeholders, right? So the sort of obvious one is advertisers who place advertisements in Facebook's newsfeed, and that is where the vast majority of Facebook's revenue comes from. But different teams are focused on different elements of how everything fits together. And so if you're the Facebook events team, you're simultaneously trying to help people find what events they might want to attend in the city that they live, but you're also trying to solve the needs of the people who are running those events, because you need to create the supply and demand side on both directions, where no one's going to come look for events if there's no events, and no one's going to list their events if there's no people looking for events. So both of these products have this very heavy dependency on both sides of the marketplace, and making sure that you're filling each person's needs and demands so that the other side is better met.
Bud?
Yes, I have two questions, one for you, Chi, and one for you, Greg. Chi, you have, if I understood the introduction, you've worked at Google, at Microsoft, Amazon, and did you do an internship at HP, or was that you, Greg?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did 6A.
So you've seen these four companies, all of which are, in a way, the universities of the future in this whole area of technology. Which of those three cultures do you think is likely in the long run to be the most successful in terms of being able to marry the delights of technology with the human, with the needs of human beings? And so that's my question for you. And Greg, my question for you is, I think we'd all be interested to know how at Facebook you're weeding out the fake news and the inappropriate content. What is that process? Because all of us are being inundated now with fake news, with scams, and that sort of thing. So those are my two questions.
That's a dangerous question for me. Yeah, I'll say that I don't know that I can predict which of these companies will be able to achieve this sort of marrying of technology with people the most. But what I would say is that one of the things I've learned is I think my opinion is that one of the most important things is the willingness, the ability to adapt, to change, to not hold on to the past too much. I think that each company actually has gone through a bit of this learning, and each of them have made some great strides in changing, and each of them has also made some fumbles in changing. If you think about each company, with Microsoft, I saw it go through this transition about how strongly it held onto Windows and how the current world is asking for it to change. And as I was at Google, and even now, there's a change. It has to go from the reliance on search and ads to inventing new products and new models, and moving from a mindset of how quickly can you get a customer on and off of Google. It used to measure itself on how quickly it could return a result and have you go away, with a new model of how do you engage them and how do you keep them with us. And with Amazon, transitioning from purely selling to this creating of devices. And then this new one that we just put out, the Look, which is a fashion-oriented device, which I know a lot of people look at as like, what are they doing? I think that the ability to adapt, ability to change, ability to form into new realms and let go of the past is the most important thing. And if a company can't do that, I don't think it will survive for very long.
And I'll speak briefly towards fake news issues. So false news, I think there's a big spectrum of things that are just outright, probably factually incorrect, to spins on various political viewpoints. Sort of false news is like a very small minority of what the content that is actually on Facebook in the first place is, but it's also a problem that's like pretty severely acute, right? And so even if it's something that doesn't happen very often, it's not good when it does. One of the challenges for Facebook is that we don't want to be in a position where we're the arbiters of truth, and we're saying this is true and this is not true, and things that are not true we'll delete off the site. It's kind of like a dicey position to put ourselves into. And so what we've done initially around false news is created a way where people can report things to us that they think aren't real. We pass those to third-party fact checkers like PolitiFact or Snopes.com, and then label things as disputed by those third-party sources. So that's sort of a way for us to say, hey, this might not be what you think it is. You should buyer beware as you read this link. The interesting thing, though, is when you zoom in on the question, most of the purveyors of the extremely false news online seem to be financially motivated. And so there's this reporter at BuzzFeed named Craig Silverman who's done a bunch of excellent reporting in the space. And he put together a bunch of examples where the same people are operating an extremely liberal and an extremely conservative fake news site that will take exactly the same event that occurred in the world, spin it really extremely both ways, write super sensational headlines, use the same photo, and publish it on a very, very right and very left site. And so these people aren't politically motivated by doing this, they're financially motivated by doing this. And so again, Facebook kind of is this marketplace of ideas in a way, and there's financial incentives that are created for people who can sort of capture attention and then monetize that through pretty junky ads. There's like a lot of fake diabetes cure ads or fake cancer cure ads that sort of show up here that lead eventually to scams that scam people out of money. And so the whole ecosystem is like a really gross corner of the internet. And so a lot of what we're trying to do to tackle this problem is, rather than going and labeling true, not true, and dealing with it that way, we're trying to think, what do we do that change the incentives overall for all of the players in the space so that the people who are the purveyors of false news aren't able to be successful on the platform and aren't able to earn the money that motivates them to do this in the first place, and make sure that higher quality publishers are able to succeed on the platform and be successful. And so you get into all of these different things about what's your motivation as a reader when you come and see something in your Facebook experience. What do you choose to click versus not click? Get some into the confirmation bias versus other kinds of things. So how can we change the experience there on that side? And then how can we change the experience on the other side so that you as a publisher are sort of motivated to do the right thing and better thing by tilting the incentives?
Good. Lori.
So Woody, I have a question for you. As you know, I've taught the so-called soft skills, a term I hate, by the way. So let's call them transferable skills, for about 30 years. And we know a lot about how to teach those skills. That's the good news. The bad news is, also being at MIT for 25 years, I think we've got an issue in that most faculty don't know how to do this, and particularly, not to be stereotypical, engineering faculty often have.
No.
I knew you would.
Josh.
Someday there would be a day that you would contradict me publicly. So, how do we fix this?
Thank goodness I'm not a university president. So I think evolution is the way to do it, and I think that despite us being very stubborn, we do in fact yield. And I think the Department of Mechanical Engineering has actually changed quite a bit in the time that I've been there. And you're much more likely, yesterday was the 2007 competition. There were lots of people gathering for that. I suspect a lot of people will be there. The biggest social event on campus, except the graduation, is the 2009 presentation, which is hardcore, pure product design enhanced by presentation skills, communication, et cetera. So I hear you, but things are better, and we just got to keep pushing.
I care a lot about this, and I have a similar philosophy that evolution or Darwinism can be a key. So one of the things I've done in my organization is that I've made it really easy for engineers to move around, make it really easy for a manager to recruit, and I actually create forums whereby my teams poach from each other. And what happens is that the leaders, the managers who don't have the soft skills, who aren't good at leading, their people leave them because there's no barrier.
Evolution.
Like a manager cannot hold an employee in place. And so by creating this free flow of people, engineers vote with their feet. And it points easily to a manager or a leader who isn't being successful in leading and encouraging people. And then one of two things happen, of course. One is they ask, like, why? What do I have to do? And it forces them to evolve, or the business struggles, in which case then a change is inevitable. So I like and I facilitate the Darwinism philosophy. I definitely have a philosophy of how do you shine a light for the right things to happen, and then how do you facilitate that movement? I think.
So how do your managers, the good ones, how do they learn the things that help them keep those people?
I think there are multiple ways that we help facilitate learning. We've developed a bunch of courses internally that really are around soft skills. Sorry for the terms. We have a course that we've developed for our team that's specifically around coaching, and we distinguish between coaching and feedback. We make a clear distinction between it, and we say this is all about coaching, it's not about feedback. But the other part, to be blunt, is that I'm open with folks and saying, hey, this is not for everybody. And some part of it is identifying those who care about that, who want to lead in that way, and facilitating them to do that. And for others who don't want to lead in that way, and facilitating for them to have a different career path that still is fulfilling, but maybe not as much in terms of the people leadership side.
John?
Question for Greg. Marshall McLuhan died in 1980 and is famous for lots of quotes, but the medium is the message and so forth. Before he died, he wrote a very interesting article in which he said, new media is retribalizing society. This is long before social media came into existence. And I'm curious, because when Facebook was started, it was going to be a bringer-togetherer. Pretty clearly, the retribalization seems to be happening. Is there, this is different from the fake news issue, is there an attempt to bring folks together more?
Yeah, so we explicitly have teams that are working on things like helping people find common ground and develop more empathy with each other. So I think one thing that's interesting about Facebook, a lot of our staff come from behavioral economics backgrounds or social psychology backgrounds. And so the research team that I work with on the newsfeed team are all folks who got their PhDs in social psychology of things like how do couples fight differently in person versus through text messaging. And so now it's like, okay, how do we go and apply those things we've learned about how people manage conflicts or resolve conflicts on a platform like Facebook? And so we have teams that focus on kind of like the negative experiences that people have or conflicts that people might have. And so you can imagine on a platform with almost 2 billion people, bullying is something that comes up. And so we have ways that people can report that they feel bullied or that one of their friends is feeling bullied. And then we coach them through how they might respond to that situation. And we say, maybe if it's someone who's younger, maybe there's a parent or teacher that you want to reach out to talk through with this, and they can sort of help you figure out what to do. One of the things I think is really interesting about the internet and social media is the same forces that allow someone with a really niche hobby to go and find the other people with that really niche hobby all over the world and connect and share and discuss that online also allow people with many other beliefs to go and find each other and connect and share with each other online and find that community. And so I think one of the really interesting questions is how can platforms like Facebook and other online tools go and reinvigorate some of the more real world community things where you're actually interacting with people who are more different than you. Because one of the things that the internet's done is really made it easier to find people who are already like yourself. And I think it's really important that people get exposure to people who are different than them and have to interact with those people and learn how to work through differences and differences in opinion. And so a lot of teams at Facebook are focused on things like how do we build stronger communities, how do we build tools for groups, and how do we help those tools help people find people who aren't already the people who hold exactly the same beliefs as them.
I have a question, it's probably for all four of you, but about gender in the workplace. And there's been a fair amount in the press about the disparity of men versus women in technology fields, especially in Silicon Valley, and I don't think it's fake news. So I have a question. How can the workplace change to make these jobs more attractive to women and LGBTQ folks? And does that have anything to do with perhaps a deficit in gracious professionalism?
Since the last part was gracious professionalism, let me take a cut at that. One of the things that I believe is true in an almost absolute way is societies get the best of what they celebrate. And we have to really try hard to celebrate some different ways to think. And I have this notion that if young people recognize that we have some Neanderthal brain left over that is really driving a lot of things that we instinctively try to do, like inappropriate grabbing or whatever. That's reptilian brain stuff. And I believe if you talk to young people about, your intellect is the only tool you've got to distinguish between the good parts of your ancient brain and the bad parts of your ancient brain, they actually seem to listen to that argument and want to get at it a little bit. And so I think we make a lot of noise about celebrating different things, and we try to create an intellectually respectable argument that says otherwise. And I keep trying to develop the clearer argument that many things about our species are distributions. Almost everything about our species is distribution. Why would you ever think that maleness and femaleness would be hard divided in a boy-girl way? There's just no reason to assume that science would support that. So I argue that way some.
Yeah, one of the things that we do in my program is a lot of tech companies, when they recruit product managers, look for a very specific mold of person. And that's usually like you have to have some computer science background and like that's it. And that's extremely limiting because if you only start with that population, you're only going to be able to sample from it and get people that are distributed like that population. So one of the things that we've done explicitly in our program is said we're not only looking for technical background people, and we go and seek a very diverse set of folks. And so we spend very little recruiting energy in the traditional channels because we know that those people are going to find us and come to us. And we actually go and actively say, where are we going to find people who in other careers or other places embody the skills that we care about? Because the skills that we care about aren't your proficiency with C++ or anything. Those technical skills are going to change pretty quickly over time. We want the people who are reflective, thoughtful, good at organizing things, make things happen from scratch, those nature of people. And we found a lot of great success recruiting from some more adjacent industries. So like management consulting is one that we've had a lot of success with. But we try to get even more creative. And one space we found awesome is Teach for America. Like the people who come out of that program, like you want someone who can manage like a complicated group of folks, like someone who's been teaching a high school classroom for 2 years, they've got the soft skills down. And so when we go to those other audiences, we're able to find different populations of people who often didn't even consider this career path. And we spend a lot of our time saying, like, we swear you can do this job. Like, we are convinced you can do this job. We need to convince you that you can do this job. Please come do this job with us. And so I think that's one of the important things to think about is not only looking, the obvious places.
I think there are lots of people in the world move us forward and innovate on this. So I'll just share my personal thoughts on it, but I don't pretend that it's the best one. For my team, I don't work as much on the recruiting side. We have a lot of recruiting, and whenever we talk about diversity, my observation is 90% of the time it ends up talking about recruiting. So what I focus on for my team is, I think of it as the leaky tire problem. Like how do you patch and solve the leaky tire? Because if we only think about recruiting, you're just pumping air in as it floats out. So with respect to how to solve the leaky tire, I really focus on the culture of how we work and how to evolve that to a place that really is embracing of all types. And we try not to focus on gender specifically. I like to think of it as soft voices, because I think that if you go across a lot of the industry, a lot of the softer voices are the ones that aren't heard as much, and that crosses many dimensions. An important part of this, what we're trying to do in my team is to make it comfortable for folks to disagree and to voice issues. I think one of the things that holds us back on really making advances in diversity is that people are afraid. Where someone who is a minority feels something and they're afraid to speak it. And on the flip side, those people who, I'll generalize, say, in a majority position or one place or another, are afraid of making a comment that highlights how someone is different, because they are afraid that it may be seen as a prejudicial statement. And I think that fear actually makes things worse. I believe that we need to allow people to be free with that in a very respectful way, and when they make mistakes, be able to highlight them, and then as family, discuss them and move on. If I use the example of what happened at Grace Hopper, I think it was 3 years ago, where there were some leaders there who made a mistake that was not as constructive as they could have been, and I think that was a mistake. But I think it was also a mistake for the community to really jump on them and to really abuse them, because at some level, they were allies, they are allies. And we need to embrace the allies of diversity and accept that we will all make mistakes. And if we can create that culture where we make it comfortable to have that communication, make it comfortable for people to make mistakes, and make it comfortable for us to call each other and learn from it, I think that's really the way we're going to accelerate the acceptance of diversity. But I don't think that's the majority position.
That's one thing I meant to say was that I think this is an area that Olin does really well in, and I'd like to see that spread as well as other aspects of Olin.
Yeah, obviously, Olin made this a priority when we first came. Our original vision was that a higher calling than preparing students for a job is to prepare them for life, particularly when they're in the undergraduate program. And the best way of doing that is to immerse them in an environment where they're going to have peers who are going to be representative of the community they live in as they get older. So we wanted a gender balance as a environmental condition as we go forward. But engineering is a particularly hard place to make that work. In building off of what Woody said a minute ago, that gender is really a spectrum, but there are two peaks, and the peaks don't lie right on top of each other in many different ways. We've found, I think empirically, that the young women students are more attracted to problems that involve people and problems that involve caring and purpose than a problem that is only about physics, for example, or a new algorithm. So the question I think that comes up, at least this is my perception of it, and there are lots of others in the room, that comes up more often from the female population when you talk about coming up with a new technical solution is, to what end? So why are we doing this again? So one of the pedagogical approaches that's been dominant at Olin from the beginning is to begin with that question, to frame the question around that, and then zero in the aperture to the technical thing that you need to solve in order to get there. Don't give them a lot of just-in-case tools with no real explicit linkage to the purpose, and imagine that that's going to happen on the end all by itself. Start with purpose and have it grow. I also think that my experience with young women is that they tend to be, as Chi said, the softer voices. Another way of getting at that is to say that they're more sensitive to group dynamic. They tend to perceive what people are feeling, not just what they're thinking, and therefore changes the conversation. And also, she was talking about fear and about making essentially a safe place for women to speak out. That is hard. I think one of the things that is important is to feel like you're not the only representative of a point of view in the room. So there's a sort of critical mass issue that comes along with it. Early in my career, several jobs ago, I became the Dean of Engineering at a major state university that had a lot of concerns about gender balance in the engineering school. So I think we had about 100 engineering faculty, and 8 of them were women. And this is through 6 departments. And the dean before me was frustrated. He tried very hard to get people in the departments who initiate all of the hiring to select a woman candidate. So he had done the usual things. Well, I won't allow you to hire unless you interview at least one woman. We did that, and they still chose the other guys. So he eventually said, okay, that's it. I'm going to play hardball now. No department will hire any faculty members unless they hire a woman. Okay, this is like 2 years before I got there. So what happened? All 6 departments hired a woman the same year. Okay, and then when I got there, their tenure time came up on my watch. Okay, there were several of them still left. I would say of the 6 or 8 that they had hired, all but 3 had chosen to leave. And so I did the exit interviews, and they were basically saying, please don't do that again. This is a bad idea. They were viewed differently for their whole career from their peers. We have one of them who actually refused to be recognized as the outstanding woman researcher in the university because she says, I don't want that label. I don't think I need to be singled out for my gender. I think I can compete with men in any area or I wouldn't be here. So it's a complicated issue. So needless to say, we don't do that at Olin. By the way, we're about 40% women on the faculty, I believe, and about 50% women in the campus as a whole. And so I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think women feel out of place or are fearful or insecure by expressing their views in a class. At least I've not heard that at Olin.
I think this is also one of the things where I am really excited about Olin, in that it teaches a lot about how to develop and engineer with people in mind. Like going back to my family heritage from Chinese, Eastern Asian, in my family culture, you were never encouraged to be the class president or something like that. It was about, like, did you get A's? What grades did you get? And when I wanted to play sports, my parents said, you're better off just staying home and studying. If you think about Asians, Eastern Asians particularly, they're generally speaking not considered a minority in engineering. So there are a lot of first-level engineers and a lot of great Asian engineers, but when you go into a VP leadership in corporations, the pyramid shrinks rapidly, more rapidly than women. If you look around this room, like there are underrepresented Asians at a higher level. And I think that, in my opinion, my observation, that it really is around a lot of the leadership people skills that aren't as emphasized as broadly, and also combined with soft voices and other aspects. So I'm very sensitive to how we think about diversity on a broader scale that really focuses not on recruiting, but really on how do we value people and how do we really allow folks to contribute at all levels. I think that's a place where we're hurting in so many different ways.
You spoke earlier, Greg, about the ability for machines to deliver information and how that would be something that would enable people, regardless to their backgrounds, to have access to information. I was wondering what the panel thought about, I often don't necessarily worry as much about people not being able to access information. What I worry about is what their minds will do with that information. I find that in a culture and a time of alternative facts, that people are too often using information for the same purpose that a drunkard uses a lamppost, for support and not illumination. And I think that the critical human element is the ability for critical thinking, the ability to say, here's what I know and what do I not know, or what would happen if I changed one of these factors, or what are the levers that we can use to get a different result. I mean, it's somewhat what Olin is thinking about now. How can we take the model that we've created and use it to transform engineering education? So it's a thing that I don't think that machines can do. So in some ways, I'm kind of glad that machines can take over some of the more simple tasks, but I feel like the real task of education, the real task of society, is to look at these broader problems and broader situations and to really apply critical thinking to it, to really be, to question information and to develop those skills that I feel are developed well in a liberal arts education, to approach the new problems and the sort of higher level, more complex problems that we see in society and in education and in business.
I actually believe that engaging people in learning to think about their own thinking is really a big deal. And when I was an assistant professor working really hard, I was in a stress management class at MIT. The good news is I was in the class. The bad news is I was there because my assistant signed me up. And I sat there, and this very eloquent woman told me about all of my inner insecurities and things that were going on in my head. And I was, wow, I'm not only a member of the species, I'm a syndrome. You know what I mean? So that was the beginning of my hint that maybe I ought to pay attention to what other people are learning about the way my brain works and start working on it myself. And I think there's a plausible intellectual argument that you can get people to recognize, hey, that was confirmation bias. I just took this little quiz and it said, man, do I ever love hearing things I already believe. So getting people to start examining that And learning about their own brain and their own cognitive processes, I think is the big deal. And to me, that's kind of the only shot we got, because I grew up in a small town in Louisiana where the belief structure was, well, you know what they say. And that was actually, that was why people say, what do you believe? Well, you know what they say. So there was no epistemology whatsoever. And I think that's a solvable problem, if we can just get people to think some. Anyway.
Yeah, I think the idea of reflection in a bunch of forms of like, what am I trying to do? How am I trying to grow? Is what I'm doing succeeding in that? And then revising that plan. In a lot of ways is similar to the design spectrum that you talk about, which is like, how do I make forward progress? Is this working? Do I need to find a different path? And I know that in a lot of my classes at Olin, reflection was explicitly one of the assignments. Like you had to do the homework assignment that was the reflection. People didn't love that assignment, but it's an extremely valuable one, I think, to do. And I think some of that also gets into questions about how do we build motivation, right? And so like there's tons of stuff that anyone can go and learn and anyone can go and find online. And I think to some of Woody's point about online learning, there's something super different about being able to go on Coursera or Udacity or edX and like take any college level course, and then living in a residential college program where there's this huge support infrastructure around you that isn't just the facts of what the material is, but really helps you like understand what it is, give you a support structure, give you a community that's going through the same thing. And I think that's going to be one of the big questions that we have to solve going forward, is how do we create those support structures so that given that everyone's going to have access to this information, they're motivated to go and learn those things, they're motivated to use those things, and they have a community around them that's supporting them in doing that.
So I love your question. Part of what I said before around my excitement around having technology and engineering and really logical thinking, evaluation, good judgment be incorporated earlier is because I think that our society is more and more dependent upon raising the overall judgment education of our population. The average is not enough. It's not enough to lift the top higher, but we have to bring everyone's ability to evaluate, judge, have good judgment up. If we don't, then the quantity of voters will win over a few who may have higher judgment. The other aspect of judgment that I think that your question all comes down to how good is evaluative judgment. And the other aspect that I would say in terms of when you think about machines and machine learning is that judgment is actually really important for the machine learning. Machine learning is based upon training on ground truth. So when you go and train on ground truth, someone has to determine what ground truth is. And for many of those, it really comes to a level of judgment. If you are training a machine over recognizing what a chair is, at some level, some human had to determine that is or isn't a chair. They had to have made that judgment, and then the machines train on it. So judgment is important for our ability to have good computers and electronics and devices, but it's also important for the base level of our entire population.
It might be a little bit of an outlier, which would not be the first time in my life, but I'm worried about a lot of this. I'm less optimistic that machine learning is going to be the transformative tool, because I think we're all of us here are from the technology world, and I worry a little bit about confirmation bias from the technical community deciding this is the future. And it obviously has a role in the future, don't get me wrong, but for example, Maslow, who was this psychologist, basically pointed out that the most important thing in every person's life is to be the most important person in somebody else's life. This is probably not going to come from a box that's connected to the internet. I think mentors have been an incredibly powerful force in my life along the way, and it was not because they were smart, it was because they cared. So I'm worried, for example, one of my mentors is a fellow named Mel Ramey, who is a member of this President's Council, but Mel's not doing well now. He has brain cancer, and he just went into hospice this last week or so. I would rather die than disappoint Mel, okay? I don't think I'm going to have the same feeling about the Amazon Echo in our living room.
Got to
yeah.
keep working on it.
There you go. There you go. I also think the higher calling for education is to produce purpose, not knowledge, and meaning. Maybe not everybody will get there, but I think that's certainly what we're hoping. We try hard here. Olin has actually been described by a good friend of ours, Howard Gardner at Harvard, as a liberal arts college in which everybody gets an engineering degree. And I think that's not a bad goal for what we're trying to do at the undergraduate level.
So some of these people know in my lab we did the very earliest research on MOOCs. We looked particularly at the very first MOOC that MIT did, which was on circuits and electronics. So we had a data set of about 157,000 people who registered, and as everyone knows, the persistent rates are quite low. But we did a lot of correlation on what contributed to those people staying in the course and succeeding. And we found that the highest factor that correlated with both persistence and achievement was the answer to the question, did you work offline with somebody, being yes.
Woody, thank you for sharing your philosophy. You know, when they ask who you would invite living or dead to your dinner, you're now on my list.
I can hardly wait. I'm an omnivore.
I think a lot about preparing graduate students to contribute to the world. And one of the things that struck me, Woody, was you said, go forth and do something that's ethically complex. And so we have synthetic biologists and people who are thinking about what shows up in your Facebook feed and lots of things that are ethically complex that our engineers, scientists, et cetera, PhDs, undergraduates are going out to do. So I'm wondering how both universities and companies think about helping our students, our employees think about that complexity and our power and responsibility in shaping that.
I wrote the foreword to Caroline Whitbeck's book on engineering ethics, and I recommend her book. She argued that resolving ethically complex things is a design problem and that you should approach it carefully. You don't call a press conference and blow the whistle. You think carefully about what you're going to do. But actually making, I recently, to the mentors at FIRST at the World Championship, I argued that FIRST is big, a whole bunch of people. Problems can bubble up. The ethos of FIRST is precious. We have to preserve that. The mentors are the most important tool. So I said, in the senior design course at MIT for some years, we had students develop their canons of ethical behavior for the course, for one another, essentially, and for the customer that might buy the product that they were designing. Assemble in small groups, make up 5 canons of ethical behavior for each of those categories. Then an instructor like myself would combine those into a list that's double as long as the final one, and then they would vote on agree, support, not necessarily ambivalence, and rank them. So I love the students at MIT. They're smart people. They've done really amazing things. They're very successful, thoughtful. However, canons of ethical behavior, intellectual property, respect for your colleagues on your team. Absolutely. We will do that. Everybody agrees. Acknowledge people's contributions. Don't take credit for something somebody else did. Yes, yes, yes. Get down a little further. What's your responsibility towards someone who's had too much to drink and is potentially doing something dangerous? Got a little muddy. Still, yeah, I'll try to help. But the commitment, the universal commitment was not necessarily there. Then you get down to, that example was back during digital music, your ethical obligation to make sure that the artist is paid for their contribution. Not there. So I think they actually appreciated having someone point out that you need a philosophically consistent set of ethical canons, because you can't respect your colleague in the team's intellectual property and ignore someone else's because it's not convenient or something. So starting to sort that out early, and I suggested to the mentors in the first teams that we have some controversial things, like how much a machine can be changed at the last minute to accommodate, et cetera. Get together and decide, and make the thought process about ethical behavior something that you do, and then you vote to buy into so that you own it, so that you have some concept that when you join the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and you read the Canons of Ethical Behavior, or ASME, actually means something, and put yourself in a position of doing some kind of exercise that pays attention to that. And I think what it does is help you realize that it's complicated at times. And one of the most emotional things I've ever participated in was sitting and listening to Roger Beaujolais talk about how he tried so hard to get people to recognize that the O-rings were going to blow on the Challenger. And he just couldn't get that across. Didn't know how to communicate that that data was a line that was going to cross and things were going to go really badly. So getting people to think about what you do in those circumstances, I think is constructive. I'm optimistic that just like, if you get people to recognize that confirmation bias is a big deal, getting them to recognize that ethics is not something that comes falling out of the sky and is etched in stone. It's something that you develop. My ethics are empathy-based. I arrive at them by doing the mental experiment of saying, well, what if everybody does this? And I think that's something that you can learn to do.
For us, the way that I try to teach this in my team is to put it in a framework that's a little more concrete, because you can have debates about what's ethical and not ethical, especially when it's really complex. And the way that we think about it is around three core principles. One is customer obsession. As talked about before, but one of the first things is this really the right thing for the customer? The second one is earns trust. Like, it's so easy to lose trust. You work for years to build trust and you lose it in an instant. And so we are really careful about questioning if something we do can lose trust. And then the third one we talk about is thinking long-term, or think big. When you think about the long-term health of the business and not about short-term, what is the right decision? And in my experience, when you think along those three axes on ethical questions, the combination of those typically helps you resolve what it is that you really should be doing. And then the final thing that empowers this is that we empower anyone in an organization at any level to call into question, to speak up and say, like, I don't think this is an earns trust decision, or I don't think this is a customer obsessed decision. And we use those terms, and you call those terms specifically, earns trust, customer obsessed, or think big, think long term. And those are sort of warning signs. We call those the andon chords. When you call one of those into question, is an andon chord that causes the decision to be halted and reevaluated, and then move forward.
Actually, Olin, most people in here know this, but not everyone is from within the Olin community, has had a set of core values and a student honor code from the beginning. In fact, in the dining hall, if you look on the wall, all of the students have had to sign on to the honor code as a condition for admission to the school. It's completely student-run, and it includes a do something clause, which basically says if you're aware that someone else is doing things that are unethical, you have an obligation to confront them about this. It's been very helpful. I think overall the school has done really well. Not that we are absent problems, but at least we have a framework for dealing with them. The only teaching that I've done in the last 10 years is in a course called Issues in Leadership and Ethics. Kim Bottomley's here. We did this a couple of times jointly with Wellesley and with Babson. That's been a real learning experience for me. We've had, for example, often invite guest speakers who've been involved in very large ethical dilemmas. And the idea was simply we would bring them, we'd have this class that has an equal number of students from Babson, Wellesley, and Olin, and the speaker would reveal what it felt like being in the crisis, and then we would have like a 2-hour debrief in a small group with the students to talk to the speaker. What really became clear in watching this is most of the sophistication and the nuance of the conflict in ethics in this case just zoomed right over the kids' heads. This is an undergraduate program. This is not, a PhD seminar that the Justice Department is putting on. So we began to sort of do the anatomy of this, and really almost everything that you teach in an engineering school is about what's feasible based on what we know about the natural law. So it's what you can do. But ethics is not about what you can do, it's about what you should do. That's a completely different set of questions. And when you look into it, that has an anatomy too. There's 2 branches on that tree. One of them is what you personally should do, and another one is what we collectively should do. And the decision process in that is quite different. From neuroscience now, we know that what you do personally doesn't originate in the prefrontal cortex. It's not logic-based. It's not about the philosophy of ethics. It's much deeper than that. It's back where Woody was talking about empathy. And students hadn't thought about this at all. We go through this in great detail. And I still remember one exercise that we had done early on to just get the juices flowing. We said, here's a hypothetical. You're going home from the grocery store, and you get in the car and you discover that the change that you got from the cashier was not enough. It was 50 cents less than you should have gotten. What do you do about that? So we talked for a few minutes. Let's repeat this. This time, though, you find out that the change that you got from the cashier was $10 less than you should have gotten. What do you do about it now? And then we did this one last time. You got in the car and you noticed that the change that you got from the cashier was in your favor by $100. What do you do about that? Does it matter how much it is? One of the students, after talking about this for a while, sort of had a breakdown and said, oh my gosh, when I thought about what I would feel if I walked away with $100 in my pocket, my first reaction was, this is good karma. This is payback for all those great things that I've done in the, in the residence hall for other people.
That's
Then she
great.
thought for a minute about the clerk who had to close out the cash register at the end of the day. And she said, all my life I've been living in a situation ethics mode, and I really have to rethink that. It's really at that fundamental level, I think at the undergraduate level. It's what you do personally when no one else is aware, when there is no accountability. How do you're the only person that you have to go to sleep with every night. How do you feel about that? That's the kind of conversation that goes on at the undergraduate level in classes at Olin on ethics. Anyway, we're over time now, and lunch is waiting for us. I really hope you'll thank the panel for us.